And to discuss what is next in the Snowden saga, I want to bring in Michael Cohen. He's a fellow with the Century Foundation and columnist for The Guardian. Miriam Elder, she's the foreign editor for BuzzFeed.com. MSNBC contributor and political editor of TheGrio.com. Perry Bacon Jr. is still here. Spencer Ackerman, U.S. National Security Editor for The Guardian, is here as well. Guardian-heavy crew this morning, but that's the big part of this story, so that only makes sense. Spencer, I'll start with you. I think we can all acknowledge that when it comes to sort of the revelations about domestic surveillance that have gotten so much attention this year, that have caused so much debate, we wouldn't know anything about that if it wasn't for Edward Snowden. And you can make a strong case, I think, that there was a valuable service provided for by that. At the same time, he released the documents that he released got into international, secrets about international spying that had nothing to do with domestic surveillance. That I think some people will make a case had no business being out there in public at all. He went to a country, Russia, with a horrible record on human rights and on free speech, and he actually sort of praised their record on human rights. And there's open questions about how much information he shared with Russia. So when you think of Edward Snowden right now, and you think of these calls for some kind of clemency or some kind of leniency, how do you balance it?
Well, first, I think I would be under, presumption of inconsistency or lack of candor if I didn't say, obviously, I support clemency for him. He was our source. So I can't not. So, let's, get that out of the way. On a personal level, when you look at the totality of what Snowden has leaked, it speaks to something that I think the American domestic political establishment often wants to sort of rule out of discussion, which is the question of whether the U.S. has the right and the ability, outside of whether it's legal, because it is, to spy on vast amounts of the rest of the world. And there, it seems like politicians, journalists, and others sort of just want to say, let's write that off. A great deal of the rest of the world is not willing to write that off. And I think you do have to factor that in to your assessment of Snowden, that it's a little bit tricky and parochial to say that only the leaks about domestic surveillance are quote-unquote legitimate leaks. There are some open questions about the legitimate scope as a policy decision for the vast amount of information accumulated from all over the world. And one other thing, something that also tends to get left out of political discussions of Snowden, is the revelations that he's put out about the state of the internet that the NSA surveils, that the level of collection, how deep it is, how embedded it is with certain companies, sometimes wittingly and oftentimes not, which when you look at people from the tech sector, when you look at people from the tech business sector, they find tremendously disturbing and are trying to curb, sometimes for their own interests and other times not.
We had, so Fred Kaplan, who writes a lot about national security for Slate, he wrote on Friday basically why Edward Snowden won't get and shouldn't get any kind of clemency. And one of the things that he said was he looked at, he said, among other things, Snowden has leaked information about the NSA's interception of communications of Taliban fighters in Pakistan's Northwest Territories, about NSA email intercepts for intelligence on what's going on inside Iran. He revealed that the NSA routinely hacks into hundreds of computers in China and Hong Kong. And he concluded from that, he said, these operations have nothing to do with domestic surveillance or even spying on allies. They are not illegal, improper, or in the context of 21st century international politics, immoral. Exposing such operations has nothing to do with whistleblowing. So Spencer was just talking about this a minute ago, but Michael, I imagine you have a different take on that.
Well, I mean, the thing is that you can't look at this in a vacuum. I mean, the argument that he should receive clemency because he revealed information about domestic spying ignores all the other material that he released. The NSA, the vast majority of what they do is foreign intelligence signals gathering. I mean, that's what they do. Small part of that is related to anti-terrorism, a very small part. And if you look at the leaks, a small part of the leaks had to do with terrorism. Most of them have to do with legitimate intelligence gathering by the U.S. government. And, to sound a parochial, I hate to be overly parochial here, but I would actually disagree with Spencer. I mean, I think, Snowden worked for the U.S. government. He signed an oath saying he wouldn't release these secrets, and he did. He should face prosecution like anybody else should for that. The idea of giving him clemency in advance, before you even know what he released, before you understand the full scope of the impact of what he's done, it's sort of like saying, in some sense, that He committed 6 murders. 1 was in self-defense.
Murder.
So I'm not saying he's a murderer. Let's be clear on that. To everybody out there, I'm not saying he's a murderer. But let's just say, as an example, that if someone committed 6 murders and 1 was in self-defense, he should have passed the other 5. It doesn't work that way. I mean, you can get. I certainly think there's a mitigating circumstance here that he released information that I think is really important to be out there, the bulk metadata material. But the flip side of it is that he also released material that, is legal. That the Congress has approved, that the United States government has a right to conduct this kind of intelligence gathering. So I think in that sense, you're confusing.
One of the issues here is the NSA official who's sort of been deputized to deal with the Snowden issue kind of put out there the idea of maybe having some kind of plea agreement with him, maybe opening some kind of discussions with him about returning him here. And I think President Obama has distanced himself from that idea. But Perry, it seems to me that, realistically speaking, if the country were to go down that road, there'd need to be some substantial cooperation from Snowden in terms of exactly how many documents does he have, who has he shared them with, what conversations has he had with the Russians. I got to say, that's what I imagine the government would be looking for. Everything I've heard from Snowden tells me he's not going to want to cooperate at that level.
We are so far from any kind of clemency happening. Those are some of the barriers you talked about right there. Also, the politics of it, in my role in the world, is also just impossible. If the president did something like a plea bargain with Edward Snowden, the House would start talking about impeachment hearings, is my guess. I mean, we are so far away from, there's such a strong disagreement among Republicans about, there's very few Republicans that have defended Edward Snowden at all. And then you have the president himself, and you look and listen to what he says very carefully. He may change his policy about the NSA because of Edward Snowden, but he doesn't really sympathize with him at all. I mean, if you look at his body language, it seems to be almost a visceral dislike of what Edward Snowden has done, a view that he's violated the rule of law in some way. I just don't see how maybe January 19th, 2017, he'll think differently. But until then, I think we're very far from any kind of real discussion of plea bargains or clemency.
Spencer wants to get back in. We will after this. And I also want to get Miriam in because I want to find out a little bit, too, just about what life is like right now in Russia for Edward Snowden and what's going to happen when this year-long, because the clock is ticking on his year-long over there. So we want to find out a little bit about that.